Any question?
Eric, I have a question about trauma. So the question is, why does the same trauma keep repeating itself in my life, for example? And how can one break that cycle?
It doesn't repeat itself. It's always different, but you make some association.
Mm-hmm.
So you must face it as it is the first time. So when something which you call trauma, which is, let's say, difficulty happen,
Mm-hmm.
don't say that it's always like that. No, it is the first time. Look better. It's not the same.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing is the same. When I recognize something, I live in memory. Life is new. So, must face it that it's the first time. So, discover what you visualize as a trauma, and actually, trauma is a name on something you just have difficulty to accept. So you must let the situation really unfold without your comment, without your preconception, and just sensorially explore the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, if the trauma is very strong, it belongs to psychology, so there are some therapeutic elements which is not my abilities. But if it is bearable to a certain point, then sometimes looking at it with new eyes, I mean looking at it, putting aside the word trauma and just face the situation.
Yeah.
Or you react toward it, or it functions within you. But you must have the energy to acknowledge it is the first time. If you said it is the second time I see that, you're projecting a memory on something. But so it is the first time. Whatever happened, it is the first time. If somebody slaps you every day, when you get slapped, it is the first time. It is only in the moment that I'll be able to move away from the cycle. Never in the past. So approach it as it is the first time and explore it according to your abilities. If it's too much for your abilities, then you ask some people to help you out, to a psychologist, or some drugs to make you relax. But this is not a problem. But it must come from, you must have the kind of dynamism to challenge the pattern, or it's always the same trauma. No, it is the first time. Look better. Like every time you eat a strawberry, it's not the same. All strawberries are different. You eat one strawberry now, the one you have eaten now, you will never get the same taste again. So tomorrow it's another strawberry. It may look like, but be more subtle, see the newness of it. Same thing with the trauma.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question? In the literature, they talk a lot about the samskaras and the, I don't know, like somehow internal stuff that gets triggered when the circumstances present themselves. Can you talk a bit about that?
In a way, when you react to something, it is not the thing which makes us react, it is that this thing brings us back to some past memory.
Yeah.
But in a way, there is no point to go to the past because the past is beginningless. There's always the past to the past. So, even if you find the first trauma when you were born, but 1 month before in your mother's womb, there was already possibility of trauma and again and again. So you're going to end up with the beginning of the world. So it's endless. So you must face the trauma as it comes. As we said, it is the first time. Yes, the situation don't cause the trauma because for somebody else the same situation will not cause the trauma. But so leave the accent on the situation and give yourself to the fact of the trauma. As long as you want to solve the situation, it is endless. Because situation is a pretext. 10 years before you had already this kind of trauma, it was a different situation.
Yeah.
So whatever situation I experience, if there is some intelligence in myself, I must see it never comes from the situation. It always reminds me of something that when I was 2 years old I already had this kind of pattern, this possibility of trauma. So the situation doesn't create a trauma, the situation brings you back to a pattern. So these two solutions. Either you live on the level of psychology, then you have a trauma, you go to see a psychologist, and the psychologist will help you to face the situation. Or you have a spiritual inclination, you see no psychologist, you have a trauma, you put aside the so-called cause of the trauma and you investigate the trauma. What is my feeling? Not justifying, not criticizing, it is right, it is wrong, it is nothing, it is what it is. So I enter the exploration, the physical expression of the trauma in my body on the moment. But as long as I concentrate on the cause, this creates a trauma in me, then I'm a food for psychologists. And that will be endless, because psychologists will at some point make me at peace with this cause, but then another cause will come earlier on that, so it's endless. So if I want to save money, I don't see psychologists, so I give my attention to the experience of the trauma, not the cause of the trauma. The feeling in my chest, in my mouth, in my belly, in my shoulders, in my whatever. And I let it unravel according to its own characteristic, not my characteristic. That means I'm not sitting now and so now I want to face the trauma. No, but I'm sitting in my living room, I'm talking with my cat, then I put some TV, and then I'm watching a movie. In this movie something happened which brings me back to the trauma. Fine, for once TV has some purpose, I close the TV, and I sit and I feel this resonance. It must come like that. So it doesn't come from me, it comes from the situation, and then I accept it. But to say that I'm going to meditate on my trauma because this happened to me, it's a childish situation, because you only will let come what you allowed you to come. And the fact that you are still experiencing a trauma, which means you haven't accepted the situation. Because if you accept the situation, there is no trauma. Trauma means I'm refusing the fact. I think there was something wrong there. It should not have happened. Then my quarrel will be during all my life. What happened should have happened. Whatever it is, deadly, violent, what happened should happen. Why? Because it did happen. So I live with fact, the only way to live. As long as I'm said, oh, this happened, it's terrible, it should not have happened, I spend my life in therapist.
Yeah.
And some people cannot do otherwise, and that's no critics. But if you're in a spiritual exploration, you no psychotherapist, you indulge in the welcoming the feeling of the trauma. Nobody said it is easy, nobody said it is funny, but that's the only way. To one day realize, yes, there was a trauma, but it's no more traumatic. It is what it is. It doesn't have to be psychological. Because the physical trauma stops, the trauma stops, but the psychological trauma can last all your life. It is this one who must be a challenge. Physical trauma may keep, you may be walking sideways for all your life. That's okay. But mentally, no, the trauma can really disappear totally. It was there, it is still there physically, but it is what it is. The first trauma is to be born. To be born is an incredible trauma. And actually all the other trauma are kind of prolongation of that one. But it's okay. You can be happy even if you were born. Yes, when you were born there was a huge trauma, but you can still be happy. So it is proof that you can live with the trauma, because it is not traumatic. It is a trauma for the child when he's born, 100%. But at some point you acknowledge this trauma. Nobody said it is funny to be born, but you can live happily later on. So whatever trauma arises, if it's not psychological, I had this many years ago, a student of mine, was a Greek man. He was the man who created the underground in Athens. He was living in Beirut. At the time, the Palestinians were very creative there. It was 30 years ago. He was kidnapped by Palestinians. He was beaten every day, tortured every day for 3 months. They will hang him and beat him up. And this man, when I met him, he still walks with a cane. He's deaf from one ear, but he was happy. So we worked together just to finish what he has done nearly 99% alone, which is to understood that it was the resistance working the trauma. So when we hear people walking toward his cell, the body will tense. He was afraid that they will come. When they will come in the room, he was afraid when they will grab him. When they will draw him to the place where they will torture him, he was afraid of what was coming next. And then when he was punched, he was afraid of the next one. And then he realized that. And he found a way to be totally one with every strike, every kick. When it was too much, he will collapse, then they will put some water on his head to wake him up. But the fact he was able to totally surrender to the fact made that psychological, this man had no trauma. No trauma at all. But he found it by himself that the trauma was the fear. And because he could face it at some point, being with the fact, it was very little for him to realize he was finished. Yes, he walked with the sticks, yes, he's deaf one ear, but he has no psychological problem. He's not afraid to go back to Beirut, he's not afraid of Palestinians, it's finished. So it's very important. But most people, no, this happened to me, and I'm traumatized for the next 20 years, and I create a security in myself. I'm more or less proud to be traumatized, it means I'm a moral person, and so I'm going to defend my trauma. It's fine, but it's suffering. At some point you realize you don't need to suffer or anything. My body may suffer, but psychologically speaking, suffering is a lack of clarity. You cannot see something clearly and suffer from what you see. When you see clearly, you don't suffer. Because you see that what happened could not have happened. But the ego cannot accept that. The ego wants to judge, no, this is wrong, I'm right, this is wrong. So of course, I spent years in psychotherapy, but that's not our way. For us, we surrender to the fact as according to our abilities. That doesn't excuse anything, but they just have a choice, suffering or openness. Most people go for suffering, they defend as trauma, but you can go for openness and then trauma goes, psychological trauma goes.
Thank you. I wanted to just ask something related to that. Sometimes when the memory comes, like you say, and I'm in that moment when I have a panic attack, I also disassociate. I don't know if that makes sense to you. I feel like I'm not in my body. I feel like I only know I'm not in my body when I come back. Do you have any thoughts about how I could stay with my body? Because this is kind of like the first time on a retreat that I'm in my body in a way.
I think it will come naturally, because when you said I'm out of my body, it's because it's how you're speaking, but it's kind of escape, and maybe you don't know any other way. But if you begin body work, if you approach it the way we explore it, I'm sure this fantasy of being out of the body will go. It's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. In some trauma, you feel yourself being on top and you see our brain has these abilities. So as much if it comes very organically, there's no problem with that. In some special event, you can have a global seeing of your situation. But the way you describe it is more like a way you found out to escape something. And slowly you will find less this need to escape it. The problematic come, just feel it physically. And not as an exercise, not something you must do, it's something that must come organically for you, because when something comes, it is needed. So feel it, what's happening in your belly, in your chest, in your throat, wherever. Make it more and more sensitive, but don't make it as a spiritual practice. Don't say I must feel, you must nothing.
Yeah.
Again, spiritual practice must be light. Heaviness belongs to the ego.
Yeah.
Seriousness belongs to the ego. Life must be light. So when you encounter body experience, it must be light. So don't force yourself to face it. Just, like when you come out, you don't make an effort to know if it's cold, if it's warm. When you sit on some ice, you don't make an effort to feel it's cold. When you sit on something very soft, you make no effort to feel it soft. So it's the same way. You feel it lightly and see what's happening. And then your level of sensitivity will increase naturally. And there is a point what in the past you will call trauma. At some point you will not call it trauma anymore. You will call it event.
Yeah.
It was the situation, but the trauma fantasy will go. It's important.